Alright, Dad's got the visual aid. Audience. Pass him down. Cameraman. August 31st, 2017, the NCAA released a financial statement declaring that they had earned over $1.045 billion in annual revenue, the highest mark in the organization's history. Business Insider in 2016 wrote an article that said in 2015, 24 Division I schools out of 231 generated over $100 million in annual revenue, and 44% of Division I schools generated less than $20 million in revenue. According to the Huffington Post, the average Division I athlete is worth more than $170,000 to every school. This number for me was staggering to read, as it means that all the tuition, all the room and board, all the costs that schools pay for athletes to be there is nothing compared to actually how much they're generating for the school in terms of revenue. I'd like to explain to you guys now how I think that student athletes are more valuable and worth the value that they have of the cost of compensating them and the factors that play into it. The NCAA, as well as many universities, generate more than enough money to compensate athletes and give them a small portion of what they're earning. According to Forbes magazine online, the NCAA earns more annual revenue than the NBA and the NHL. In 40 out of 50 states in 2017, the highest paid public official in each state was the head coach of the state university's football team or the men's basketball team. Another fact that I saw was very interesting on ESPN, and I also read on Forbes magazine, was the year that Doug Flutie, the quarterback of Boston College, threw his famous Hail Mary pass and he won the Heisman Trophy. Boston College's undergraduate admissions went up by 25% the following year, and their SAT scores went up by 110 points. I thought that this was a very impactful fact to the argument, as it shows that athletes have a bigger impact than on just the sport and the community of what they're playing. I also think that another factor on why athletes should be compensated is that it can prevent bribing. Obviously, bribery in sports is never something that we're going to be able to eliminate, but it's something that we can definitely strive to slow down and to attempt to get rid of. This past year, Rick Pitino, a Hall of Fame coach for the University of Louisville, was fired after he was discovered in a bribery scandal by the FBI in 2 years. University of Arizona, as well as Oklahoma State, University of Southern California, as well as Auburn, all were discovered in FBI bribing investigations. These organizations are all pillars of college sports, and it was very interesting for me to grow up watching all these organizations and seeing many players that I loved watching and thinking back on how they could have just been there because of money and they might not have been there otherwise. I think compensation can allow people to provide for themselves and their family. I also think that many people have a problem with having to focus on their family and the outside factors of their lives. But at the same time, compensation, whether it's small or large, can definitely have a factor on that and help them with that. I think another thing that when you get into this discussion with people, you have to be able to answer why people or why athletes might not be paid or why they should not be paid. You have to be able to answer those questions. The first question you have to answer is, what motivation are student athletes going to have when they're actually getting paid in college and they're making money? Why would a student athlete work harder for a test than a practice one day and then a workout one night? When they've got a class the next day or homework due that night, why would they not do it when they're getting paid for the sport and not for the class? I think that there's only one way to do that. I think that you have to establish a baseline. I think that the baseline for the pay has to be set either on a variable factor on how much students generate for their schools and their economies in their area, or it has to be a set baseline based on the division that they're in and the sport that they play for their school and how important that is. The NCAA generates over $129 million in championship ticket revenue every single year. I think a small percentage of this could help those students and could also help them to focus on stuff outside of school, whether it be community work, service work, or whatever it could be. I think another question that people might have is, why not put the money back into schools and put it into academic programs? I think this is definitely true, and I think a lot of the money should go back into schools and academic programs. But as I've stated, there's millions and hundreds of $millions that gets generated by these sports. I'll give you an example. Leonard Fournette, a running back for LSU, was a star player since one of his freshman years of high school. He knew he was going to be in the NFL one day. He knew he was going to play at a Division I school, and he ended up having his first child by his senior year of high school. He went into college having to deal with a Division I schedule, 40 hours of practice a week, games, responsibilities that he couldn't take care of. And he also had to deal with having a kid and supporting her and his wife. But he couldn't do it. He had his wife and his kid had to move back to their hometown, and he couldn't see them as much as he wanted to because he didn't have enough money, and his wife had to find a job for them, her and her daughter. I also read an article on NCAA.org that stated how much money is put into different categories that the NCAA earns each year. $46.7 million from the NCAA goes towards assisting D1 schools with academic programs and services, as well as $82.2 million towards student athletes, I quote, needs that arise during their college years. These statements to me were very concerning, as I worried about the fact of where that money might actually be going. That's a very, very vague description for something that's a lot of money and something that a lot of people care a lot about. The topic of athletes getting paid is something that's very heated to a lot of people, and people that are athletes, that are professional athletes, have very big voices in the world, and they can have a very big impact on what people think. I think the point of my speech is not that athletes should be getting paid as professional athletes. I think that they should be compensated and be able to support themselves while they're putting so much time and effort into their sports. Sports in college, Division I sports, are like a job. My own cousin quit a sport that she loved in college after she had worked so hard to be in the top 10 program in lacrosse because she didn't like dealing with the schedule, and it wasn't worth it to her because she knew that there would be no money for her after college. It was completely understandable, but it was very upsetting to hear, as I know how hard she worked for that and I know how bad she wanted that. Thank you.
Yay.
Very good, Joe.